Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Eddy. Welcome to a new episode of VLGA Connect, your weekly dose of news and interviews with sector leaders from across Victoria, sponsored by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Coming up today, Evan King, the CEO of the City of Ballarat, is here to talk to me about the impact of the fuel crisis on the council's bottom line and the implications of that recent Fair Work Commission ruling on contracts. And Tony Raunic from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers is here. We'll get Tony's take on some recent developments, including the mayoral situation at Wyndham and at Bass Coast. And this week's Connect News update will cover a week of high drama in council chambers, a landmark planning decision in Northcote, and a growing divide between regional and metropolitan infrastructure. That's all coming up on Connect News. We begin in the state's west, where Glenelg Shire is reeling from the sensational mid-meeting resignation of long-serving councillor Mike Noske. Councillor Noske walked out after a heated vote on the draft budget, which includes a rate increase. He's accusing the council of prioritising short-term interests over the wider community. Mr Noske served over 7 years, including a stint as mayor. The council is discussing next steps with the VEC. Meanwhile, in Wyndham, Mayor Preet Singh is back at his desk despite a unanimous vote of no confidence from his fellow councillors. Residents held a third community rally over the weekend, demanding he step down for providing a character reference for a convicted sex offender. Under the Local Government Act, the council remains powerless to remove him from office before his term expires late this year. Bass Coast Shire has a new leadership team. Councillor Brett Tessari returns for his fourth stint as mayor after Councillor Rochelle Halstead stepped down to focus on her Liberal candidacy for the seat of Bass at the state election. In a contested vote for deputy, Councillor Ron Bauer defeated Councillor John Temby 6-3. In Cardinia, a war of words is erupting over the Lang Lang bypass. Local MP Jordan Crugnale has accused the council of sitting on land, but Mayor Brett Owen has hit back, calling the MP's claims misleading. The Mayor says the $57 million project is far beyond the council's reach, with quarry operators contributing less than 2% of the cost. In Northcote, the coolest street in the world is getting a golden arches. VCAT has overturned Darebin Council's refusal of a 24-hour McDonald's on High Street. While the development promises 100 jobs, local traders fear for the area's unique character. Down in Greater Dandenong, councillors are considering a U-turn on the state-mandated purple glass recycling bins. With the container deposit scheme already doing the heavy lifting, some argue the increase to $16 per household for a new bin rollout is an unnecessary burden. In Alpine Shire, Mayor Sarah Nicholas is calling for calm and respect after a shocking wave of racism and vilification was directed at childcare staff following fee increases. In Maribyrnong, with the scrapping of a controversial private security trial in Footscray, the council is consulting on a trial of a welcome crew of social workers, though local traders remain sceptical as vandalism and drug activity hits a 20-year high. Murrindindi and Strathbogie Shires are pleading with the state government for a 6-month extension on free bushfire waste disposal. With the program set to expire in just 12 days, mayors warn that fewer than 10 properties have been cleared so far, threatening a spike in illegal dumping. On the roads and rails, Greater Shepparton Mayor Shane Sarli says regional cities are being overlooked in the latest transport funding, which is favouring Melbourne and Geelong. However, the city of Casey is celebrating a win, securing expanded bus routes for Botanic Ridge and Clyde after a sustained advocacy campaign. In Wangaratta, the community is mourning the loss of former councillors John Kevin Howard and Kieran Clem, who were honoured this week for their combined decades of service to the rural city. And finally, a miracle in the Northern Grampians. Duke, a 13-year-old cat who went missing from his Ballarat home 2 years ago, has been found safe in St Arnaud, over 100 kilometres away. He was reunited with his family this week, thanks to his microchip. And Mayor Karen Hislop says it's a $70 investment that clearly pays for itself. And that's Connect News for this week. Now, we want to turn to the fuel crisis and its impact on local government. ABC News has reported this week on the response from several councils, including Pyrenees Shire. Larger councils like Ballarat are also feeling the pinch, estimating a hit of around $150,000 per month. The CEO of the City of Ballarat, Evan King, joins me now. Evan, great to have you on VLGA Connect. How's things going there in Ballarat for you?
Yeah, look, really, really good. Thank you, Chris, and thank you for the invitation to come on and talk all things fuel crisis. But yeah, no, life's never dull working in a regional city.
No, it is not. And look, I've been looking for a council CEO for a couple of weeks now to talk about the implications of that Fair Work Commission decision. Let's perhaps just park that at one side. But I did see you made some comments in the local media about the impact of just the rising cost of fuel on council operations. Can you quantify that for us a bit? When did you see it start to hit, and what has it actually meant for you?
Yeah, so what we're seeing at the moment is about $150,000 a month in increased fuel costs. Now, probably the larger portion of that is bulk diesel purchase. We obviously run a in-house waste collection service, so that's obviously one of the larger impacts, and then sort of obviously all the miscellaneous fuel purchases that councils make. So about $150,000 a month. We expect the total cost of that for this financial year will be about $500,000, and
Yeah.
that's challenging because of the timing of the year, because we're sort of hurtling in towards the end of the financial year. You've got less ability to be able to delay projects, rephase, priorities that we might be working on. So you've got less ability to try and find the save. If it happens at the start of a financial year, you've got more ability to
To make
rephase,
adjustments.
rephase your capital works
Yeah.
program. So that's a fairly sizable impact.
What is the, in the context of your overall budget, what is 500,000 mean?
Yeah, so we turn over about $300 million in revenue a year. So $100 million on materials and services, and our capital works budget is about $100 million. So
Yeah.
and I suppose the bigger issue is there's just physically no ability to delay anything at this point of the year, because most things are contracted, and we're in the construction period at the moment, and large levels of capital works being delivered. If it was at the start of the financial year, I'd have far greater ability to say, well, I won't do that road reconstruction project or something. So it's going to impact our end of year result.
And you'll have to bridge that obviously somehow. It's probably a bit like robbing Peter to pay Paul in some respects. But on the ground, what does it mean in terms of service delivery or project delivery, do you think?
Yeah. So we're not making any changes to service delivery at the moment, and we're not making any changes to a capital works program. So it'll just come out of retained earnings. Is basically the result of that. What is challenging at the moment is we're in the middle of doing next year's budget and trying to develop a budget, with the potential of significant inflation impacts occurring that we're not completely aware of. And when the Strait of Hormuz ultimately opens, there'll still be a massive lag after that as supply chains actually work their way out. So everything's not going to go back to normal the day the strait opens. So trying to factor that into a budget is really difficult. What we're doing, we've identified a whole range of projects that we can phase into a future year. So that's probably our main tool to manage next year's impacts. We're also looking at trying to identify some savings and setting up an inflationary reserve. And we did this during COVID when building costs were escalating at a rapid rate. We identified savings, put the money in a reserve, and then when tenders came in, more often than not above budgeted value, we would use the reserve to offset the increased costs.
Yeah.
So we're sort of looking at I suppose a two-pronged approach to how we manage next year's budget.
So that sort of answers the question I was going to ask about how you sort of scenario plan should this go on for some time. I see, I think it was Upper Lachlan Shire in New South Wales, for example, have paused their green waste collection simply to cut down on their use of fuel. You haven't looked at those sort of responses. They don't look like they need to happen.
We really don't want to impact service delivery at
Mm.
this stage, so we're probably more inclined to rephase out capital works to
Yeah.
manage it. Now,
Mm.
you know, I'm saying that with the current picture in mind. Now, if it continues on and inflation starts to go, above 5.75%, 6%, or whatever it might be, then I might have to
Yeah.
make some other decisions as
Yes.
if that eventuates. But at this point in time, there isn't any great appetite to start reducing services. What is interesting at the moment is contracts that we've got, existing contracts in place at the moment, clearly don't have rise and fall clauses in them. I've got contracts where we've awarded the tender but haven't signed the contract, and then I've got tenders that are out in market at the moment, and so
Mm.
we're managing, and this is obviously pre the Fair Work Commission ruling. Um, you know, each of those scenarios has a slightly different outcome and impact. We've been pushing back pretty hard on contracted services and construction works, once again because I don't have a massive big pool of funds to top up projects to cover those costs, and because we're at the end of the financial year,
Yeah.
I once again can't say, well, I won't do that road project to fund that. Now, there've been some pretty challenging conversations with contractors, and they're trying to keep workforces employed, but it's a bit of a false economy. If I allocate additional funds to an existing contract, all I'm going to do is take another contract out in the future. So there's actually no more work for anyone. They're just bringing forward,
Yeah.
that payment. So that's that's a pretty challenging conversation at the moment with contractors coming. There's also, I think, the danger of a bit of price gouging occurring as well, and people seeing the opportunity to try and escalate costs. So we're pushing back pretty hard for people to be able to quantify how they're calculating those increased costs.
Yeah, because traditionally local government's been seen as a bit of an easy target in those respects, haven't they?
And everyone wants to pass it on to somebody, and the
Yeah.
problem is I can't pass it on to anyone else. So
Yeah.
we're at the end of the line, and everyone wants us to take all of the pain of this of the fuel crisis, and I think it needs to be shared a little bit in
Yeah.
the end.
Can we talk briefly about the Fair Work Commission ruling? I've been keen to find a CEO that's had the chance to get their head around what this means for councils. What have you had to do, or what are you going to have to do now as a result of that ruling that was different to perhaps a month ago?
Yeah, so great question, and I suppose I just explained our historical process in pushing back pretty hard. Obviously, the Fair Work Commission ruling puts another lens over that, and the road transport contracted claim order takes a bit of digesting, and really, obviously, really relates to the road transport components of both services and construction contracts.
Yeah.
So what we've done is gone through all of our current contracts, and also all of our panels. So looking at all of our panels and which ones have a direct road transport correlation. So going through all of those, we've identified about 8 service contracts and panel agreements that will be directly impacted. And then we've got about 27 construction contracts that may be affected. So what we'll do now is go and write to all of those contractors, get them to determine whether they believe there is impact or not, and then obviously do the calculation around what the impact is. We will assess that. We're in the process of creating a bit of a checklist that they will need to fill out. We'll then assess it, and then if that's the case, then we will get them to invoice us for those escalated costs. Now, I can't quantify what the dollar value of the impact of that is at this stage. We're obviously just in the infancy of identifying, which contracts have a direct impact and which contracts may have a secondary impact on them. So we're going to be proactive. We're not going to sit back and wait for contractors to come to us, because I think there could be quite a delay in that, and then you're still going to have to pay for the historical impacts of that. So I think it's better to actually be on the front foot and actually go out to those contractors, get them to quantify it and deal with it, and because then I can be a lot more proactive in, once I've got a better understanding of the financial impact, I can make better decisions around, what projects I might phase out of the year to be able to manage those impacts.
And am I understanding correctly that you need to have a process in place where you look at these figures every fortnight? Is it every 2 weeks? Yeah.
So they say twice a month. So that may or may not mean every 2 weeks, but so you've got to sort of develop a fairly there's got to be a bit of automation in that process, because that's, as I said before, 8 directly impacted contracts and 27 secondary impact contracts. We're going to need to find a way to streamline that so that we're not spending a huge amount of administrative time sort of going. So we need an agreed methodology for how we're going to do that, and a process.
Evan, it occurs to me that every council pretty much in Australia is impacted by this. Are you all designing this wheel individually, or is there some sector collaboration going on to work through this process?
Look, there's certainly some sector-wide work from an MAV perspective, and they've certainly been quite proactive in getting legal advice and providing some guidance. I suppose based on that, I've gone off and developed our own process.
Yep.
And as local government works, as better than anyone, we will start to share that, and I imagine others will start to share, and we'll all sort of modify what we're doing. But there will be some individual sort of processes, which is the unfortunate, I suppose, outcome sometimes in local government. As much as we do work together, we're all under slightly different pressures, and
true. It is. It's awkward, isn't it? But you'd love to think there's a simple way of getting everyone on the same page at the same time. The other thing that occurs to me while we're talking, Evan, you talked about back earlier using retained earnings to cover some of these adjustments that you're having to make. Is there an opportunity here? You think I'm getting a bit philosophical. Local government obviously often gets criticised for carrying surpluses, for having reserves, and attacked for holding on to that money. But here's a perfect example of why it's appropriate to do this, isn't it?
Which is what we say. We say that all the time, don't we? From an emergency perspective, and if you look at sort of the natural disasters that occur and the process now around how you claim, reimbursement, you've got to have some unallocated funds sitting in your bank account these days. I don't think it's the unallocated funds that causes us issues from a bank account perspective. It's quite often undelivered capital works that makes our bank accounts look quite quite bloated at the end of financial years.
Yeah.
You know, like most councils, we all do an exercise at the end of the financial year and sort of, back everything out. And generally, most councils have very little unallocated funds. We have been purposely trying to build that up over the last few years to have a buffer for things like this. Yeah.
You've been at Ballarat for 5 years, I think. You arrived there in the middle of COVID. Where does this particular crisis sit in terms of the big challenges you've had in your time at Ballarat?
Well, my first day was in the middle of lockdown, so my first day was in moccasins at home, which was always
Yeah.
always a bit interesting. Yeah, it does have a bit of feeling around COVID, and particularly the thirst for information from various government departments. Like, you just feel like now everyone's reaching in and wanting to understand the impact and what you're doing. So it feels like we're starting to spend a disproportionate amount of time feeding information into the machine as opposed to actually, addressing the issue. Now,
issues.
it is important. We do need to provide that information so that there's a statewide view of it and all those sorts of things. But what quite often happens is you've got multiple departments seeking the same information, so there's not a lot of sort of streamlining from that perspective. So there are some elements of sort of COVID that you start to think, oh, this this is familiar.
Yes, I bet it's got that feel about it. Evan, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you. I think a lot of people will find those insights really useful as everyone's sort of in the same boat, navigating these issues with a lot of uncertainty still hanging over the whole fuel crisis issue. So appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.
No, thank you, Chris.
Evan King, CEO of the City of Ballarat. Well, up next, and to catch up on a number of things that have been happening around the sector over the past few weeks, Tony Raunic joins us from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Hello, Tony. How have you been?
Very good, Chris. Another busy week, another month gone, and we're into May, aren't we? Yeah.
It's just you don't know what you're going to be talking about from one week to the next, do you? You probably would have heard Evan King's been on talking about the fuel crisis impact and that Fair Work Commission ruling, which is very interesting. I think a lot of people are still getting their heads around that. Have you seen the viral moment this week from Glenelgshire down in the states southwest, a councillor resigning mid-meeting?
Yes, I did see that, and I think seemed to take the council by surprise, and yet to work out what the implications are in terms of by-elections or countbacks, Chris. But it's yet another situation where partway through a term, a council has to regroup and start again.
Yeah. So I have had a quick look. Glenelg, I'm pretty sure, is unsubdivided. So that would mean a countback usually. And the council's talking to the VEC about timing for that. The big story, though, that everyone's watching and waiting to see whether there's any new developments is out at Wyndham. The Mayor, Preet Singh, was back chairing a council meeting this week, and that was 24 hours after the council got together without Councillor Singh online to pass a no confidence motion, still calling for his resignation, which he's refusing to do so far. What's your take on all of this in terms of what the Act says, what the community expectations seem to be, and there's a lot of political elements flowing through this too?
Yeah. Well, firstly, the Act doesn't give councillors any legal mechanism to force the mayor against his will to step down during the mayoral term. So that vote of no confidence is just an indication of the feelings of the council and has no legal impact. And that's very similar to what occurred at Whittlesea Council. I think it was last year, but certainly some time ago. So there are, we've heard about the prospect of legislative reform here, where we might see a mechanism being brought in like a resolution passed by a special majority to enable councillors to remove the mayor during the term, but that doesn't apply now. What do I think?
And that's largely because it's a one-year appointment of the mayor, isn't it? If it was 2 years, it would be different, correct?
Yeah, well, certainly there's an ability. I think I have to look at that one to be
Mm.
honest, Chris. But I think there's an ability during the 2-year term perhaps to reduce that. But I think that in this case, what I think is really apparent is that it's not tenable for
Mm.
Councillor Singh to remain the mayor in circumstances where he doesn't have the confidence of all of his councillor colleagues.
Yeah.
And so we've got this horrible situation where Councillor Singh's saying that he's not he plans to, I think he took leave of absence initially, but then said, he's returning to his role as mayor, and the councillor's saying, well, we don't like that. Now, unfortunately, the poor new minister, Paul Hamer, has got this as, I think, the priority to deal with in the sector. And it's a really difficult situation because he doesn't, frankly, have a lot of ability to remove quickly um, Councillor Preet from his position, Councillor Singh, sorry, from his position either as mayor or as a councillor. He needs really a report from a municipal monitor, a VCAT decision, a councillor conduct panel decision, these sorts of things, a Supreme Court decision. And then he needs to then take the view that based on that decision or that advice, that report from a monitor, that, Councillor Preet somehow preventing the council from
Yeah.
performing its duties or otherwise creating sort of health and safety risks. And then he's got certain powers under the Act to stand down a councillor. I think that the councillors were right ultimately to call upon Councillor Singh to step down from his councillor role if they felt they couldn't work with him in that role and the community couldn't work with him. I don't think it's appropriate to call for him to resign from the council for a matter that took place or actions, conduct that took place prior to him becoming a councillor. And of course, what occurred is the councillors all wrote to the former minister, Minister Stakos, on the 2nd of April saying, we want you to step in and remove Councillor Singh from his councillor role. Now, I think that the councillors didn't vote Councillor Singh into that role. The community voted him in. And I think that unless his committed conduct that is in breach of the code while he's a councillor, or he's been charged with a criminal offence, even an offence relating to something that occurred prior to his time as a councillor, unless those things arise, I don't think that there's grounds for him to be forcibly removed from his role. I think he'll have to face the people at some point in the future, and they will, no doubt, take account of these things. And I would say to the there's a number of people listening. I'd say a few things too. Firstly, to Councillor Singh, I'd say resign from your role as mayor because you're driving the minister into a position where the minister really is going to be forced to act, perhaps perhaps appoint a municipal monitor now. And we know that.
So just on that, Tony, so Minister Stakos said there'd be a monitor, and some of the media reports have said a monitor's been appointed. I don't think that's the case. I've heard nothing about an actual monitor being installed there. Have you?
Yeah, that's right. So decision to appoint a monitor made by the former minister, but no announcement of an appointment. I think what's occurred, and understandably, I think new Minister Hamer's come in and there's, finding his feet, and there's various kind of just administrative things that need to be in place. But that presumably will occur, and there'll be an announcement, and presumably the minister can ask the municipal monitor for an emergency interim report.
Right.
And what I'm saying to Councillor Singh is that, you're really driving the minister into a position where the only way to break this deadlock is to see, him acting on a report to stand you down from your role on council. Now, I think that, I would say to Councillor Singh's colleagues, is if he steps down from the role of mayor, then that ought to be enough. Would you, each of you as individual councillors, want any conduct, anything that you've done, anything that you've written, any statement you've made prior to becoming a councillor to be, up for consideration now as to whether you should, things that you regret, things that you've apologised for, like Councillor Singh has done here. He's publicly apologised to the victim and their family and said he regrets what's taken
Yeah.
place and he regrets giving that character reference to a sex offender. Would you want any of that, conduct prior to becoming a councillor become relevant to, should you hold that office now? And I
Yeah.
think we're opening a massive Pandora's box here if we go to that.
You said you had a message for a number of people here, so that's what you'd say to Councillor Singh. Who else do you want to say something to?
Well, I'd say that, and to Councillor Singh's colleagues in
Yeah.
terms of, if he steps down from the mayoralty, I think that should be enough. And then, but look, I think my message to the minister would be, look, this is your priority from a sector perspective. Clearly, I'm not saying the council can't make decisions and planning decisions and other decisions that they would presumably make, but clearly this scenario where the principal spokesperson for the council, the public face, the key public face of the council is someone who does not have the confidence of all his colleagues. That's just not tenable. And understandably, I think the minister needs to expedite, if this continues, expedite an emergency report from a monitor. I mean, there are other processes that could lead to a stand down of a councillor, but they are more involved and necessarily take more time. A councillor could seek to convene a councillor conduct panel alleging that there is serious misconduct, go to VCAT alleging gross misconduct. There can be applications in the Supreme Court in that regard too. But those are long
None of
drawn
that
out.
would seem to be relevant here, given the act that he's been criticised for happened before he became a councillor. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's my fundamental position here.
Mm.
And so the only real grounds I think for his forcible removal would be if the minister took the view on the advice of a monitor, a commission of inquiry, a VCAT or court decision, took the view that Councillor Preet's presence on the council was either causing a risk to the health and safety of individuals, could be staff, could be councillors, could be members of the public. That's probably less,
Yeah.
a likely position. Or the minister took the view that his presence on the council was preventing the council from performing its, duties.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that might be the advice of a monitor. And as I say, it's a little in Councillor Singh's hands here. If he stepped down from the role of mayor, I think that very much makes it less likely one could come to that conclusion.
All right, we'll watch that with interest. There's a lot online about this, Tony.
Mm.
You've probably seen the reports, as have I. Some are suggesting that there's, political motivations at play here. A new party been formed out in the West. I mean, we're over 2 years away from the next council elections, but perhaps every post being made a winner from some of those people who obviously want to see some change around the council table. But anyway, as you say, the ball is in the court of others. We'll wait and see what develops, and no doubt we'll be talking about that again very soon. While we're on mayoral issues, Tony, down in Bass Coast Shire in Gippsland this week, Rochelle Halstead made the surprise announcement that she was stepping down as mayor. Not that big a surprise given she's been pre-selected as Liberal candidate for the seat of Bass in the state election. She's staying on as a councillor until, as I understand it, the election campaign gets underway in earnest. But it has raised that question again where people are observing and seeing perhaps slightly different approaches to when sitting councillors run for higher office. What does the legislation say that a councillor must do at the minimum? I guess it would be my question to you.
Well, in fact, the legislation just says at the minimum that a councillor must not be absent from 4 consecutive council meetings or months in a row, and without leave of absence, and cannot, sit in the Parliament of Victoria or indeed any other Parliament of Australia, and be a councillor at the same time. So should Councillor Halstead be elected to the Parliament, she cannot continue as a councillor. But until that very point, under the Local Government Act, there is no obligation for a councillor candidate to take leave of absence, to step down from their mayoral role, or take leave of absence from their councillor role. Now, there are some fundamental issues, though, for a councillor who's choosing to be a candidate, and they are created by the Local Government Act. So a councillor has to deal firstly with conflicts of interest. So if a councillor was voting on issues in the lead up to an election and had at that point either indicated they were running for a particular party, so they were a prospective candidate, or indeed nominated for a particular party, then, if an issue came before the council where the political party that the councillor in question was associated with had a platform on, I would say that arguably there's a conflict of interest there. A conflict between the councillor's obligations to follow lavishly the policy of the party that they have committed to versus being impartial in council decisions. So that would apply to any councillor who runs as a candidate. Then when we come to people who've been mayors or are mayors, like in this case, until recently, Councillor Halstead, I think particularly Section 123 comes in, the misuse of position. And that is, you can't use your position as a councillor to gain a benefit for yourself or others. And so as the mayor, you're being, called to, stand up, represent the council at multiple events. If you, even in any way, even if not deliberately, if people think that you're somehow, using those events to, further your candidacy, standing up and speaking on behalf of council and maybe even alluding to the forthcoming election, there's a strong argument to say that you've misused your position as the mayor to benefit yourself or the party in that candidacy. So I think Councillor Halstead has done the right thing here, stepping down from the mayoralty without any legal obligation to do so. But I think if she hadn't have done that, she might have been the subject of allegations of, misuse of her position if she, appeared at key events in the lead up to the election as the mayor.
Interesting. This is an issue that's challenged a few councils this year or in the past 12 months as the state election approaches. Yeah. Remembering at Queenscliff, they had a policy there that went out for consultation, etc. And when it came back, the councillors decided to treat it as a guideline and not adopt it as a policy, which sort of suggests that, somebody's thinking ahead there to what they might do this year.
Yeah.
And other Chris, councils are being challenged by it as well.
Yeah, and look, there are a lot of policies that count. In fact, I think if we took a poll of councils, and I haven't done this, Chris, but I have looked into this in the past and haven't exhaustively looked at 79 councils. But I think most councils in Victoria, in their election policy, deal with councillors as candidates, and most of them make this distinction between a prospective candidate and a nominated candidate, and say, look, it's all right when you've publicly declared you're going to run, you can still remain a councillor, but the moment that you formally nominate with the Victorian Electoral Commission or the Australian Electoral Commission, if it's a federal election, then under our policy, you ought to take leave of absence. Now, my point though is that I'm going to freak out a lot of CEOs now in this phrase saying it's just a policy, because it's not actually what the Local Government Act says. Now, I think it's a sound policy. I think ethically and morally it makes sense, but I don't know. I know that it's not backed by the Local Government Act provisions, and I know of councillors who maintained their council position right up to the very day of the federal or state election that they were a candidate in, and collected their allowance right up to that very day, Chris. And I'm not aware of any you know, penalties or sanctions that they faced.
So you're saying it's sound policy, but it's just a policy. That's the headline.
Yeah, and I think you know, we're forever making it giving jobs for the legislators, aren't we? But you know, when we go through another round of Local Government Act reforms, maybe it's something that's clarified in the Local Government Act itself.
Yeah. Okay. It'll be interesting to see what happens in Bass, because the Labor MP there is not recontesting, Jordan Craignail. She's been involved in a bit of a war of words with Cardinia Shire this week, which I reported on earlier. So Rochelle Halstead running as a Liberal candidate. I guess there's a chance there. It's going to be perhaps a three-cornered, if not more, contest. So
And
one
Chris,
that we'll be
this
watching.
weekend, indeed, even sooner, this weekend is the Nepean
Nepean, yes.
by-election, where we have the Councillor Marsh is on leave of absence from Mornington Peninsula Shire. So, you know, we'll presumably, well, presumably by Monday we'll know the outcome of that,
Yes.
and by the next episode we'll know whether Councillor Marsh is back on the council,
Yes, we
or
will.
you know, is off to higher duties, and we'll see a new councillor in that.
Just very quickly before I let you go, I've
Mm.
reported on the Local Government News Roundup a couple of times the situation with Broken Hill Council in New South Wales, where they took their lawyer to court alleging that they'd been overcharged, and the court agreed, and they've been awarded a multi-million-dollar settlement there. Begs the question, how do lawyers account for their time when they're working for councils? Tony
There are
Raunic at
these
Hunt and Hunt Lawyers.
there are these horrible things called timesheets, and many law firms, I think, in fact, most law firms, including my own, still use them internally.
Right.
Um, some law firms still use them to calculate charges, and most often that occurs around litigation, which is difficult to provide an absolute fee quote at the start. Like if a council's going into being sued or suing, for us to say, you know, it will cost you this defined, you know, discrete figure is a difficult thing, as opposed to a property transaction, a commercial transaction, a discrete piece of advice. So we still record 6-minute units in
Really?
timesheets. Chris, one thing I've never ever done is record. I don't think I've ever recorded more than sort of 12 hours of billable units in a day, but I certainly haven't done what this lawyer up in Broken Hill did on multiple occasions, Chris. He recorded more than 24 hours of billable time in a day. In fact, up to 30 hours
Yeah,
that
yeah.
he billed the council for in a day. So that's a scientific impossibility, as we know.
Right.
I think he said it was down to an error. International dates, he was traveling, and administrative entry errors and that. But extraordinary decision, this one, where it just shows you the importance of having someone at council managing these relationships. And what occurred was, it seems that there was ultimate charges. There was a kind of a bonus that the lawyer awarded himself in his invoice
Right.
for a good result, even though council was only awarded $1.5 million, and I think ultimately was charged about $10 million.
Yeah.
But thankfully, the cost courts have seen fit to decide that that invoice wasn't appropriate, and have ordered, in fact, this lawyer and his law firm to repay the council, or to pay the council costs.
So there's been, I think the expression, Mayor of Broken Hill used was a lot of hurt and anger in the community about this issue. And the Mayor there, Tom Kennedy, has this week released all of the detail of that matter. And here are the numbers, Tony. The council spent a total of $14.4 million on legal matters about this issue. It was about a civic centre. It recouped 3.9 million through settlements and insurance, was awarded 4.7 million in that legal battle against its former lawyers. But he's saying now they still expect a shortfall. Remember, this is all just on legal costs of $5.8 million.
Yeah,
Think
yeah.
about
Look,
that.
yeah, you've got to be, and this is why you've really got to take a commercial approach to these litigations and just understand that at the end of the day, someone's going to have to pay. You can be successful, but is it a Pyrrhic victory in the sense of the community considerably out of pocket? Occasionally, councils run these cases as a precedent, saying, "Well, we don't want, to be the target of future actions like this." But wow, I think there should be some tough questions being asked by the community
Yeah.
of the council. And this wouldn't have been a decision of the councillors, I would suggest. I think it was very much an operational decision, I would imagine, but of the executive of the day, what advice were they seeking about likely costs, about likely recovery, and did they act on advice or not? And maybe this is the end of this, Chris, because if they did act on advice, they might well think that advice in hindsight was not good advice.
Yeah. Well, a couple of the officers were awarded damages here too, or costs. Don't want to get into the detail. It's all there online. Shock and anger was the expression the Mayor used, by the way, not hurt and anger, although I'm sure a lot of people are feeling a lot of hurt about that as well. All right, Tony, we better leave it there.
Yeah, got to
Lots
do
to
my
talk about.
timesheet, Chris.
Yes, do your timesheet, and we'll catch up again very soon as the news develops here in Victoria. Thank you, Tony. Have a good week ahead, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Chris.
That's Tony Raunic from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers. Thanks to Evan King, my earlier guest, and Tony there for joining us on VLGA Connect this week. Lots to talk about as usual. I'm sure that will be the case again next week. I want to thank all those who joined us on Thursday night for our Global Executive Live panel presented by the VLGA and LGIU. We had people in the UK and Australia talking about the changing role of councils and a push towards more effective advocacy. If you were registered for that event, look out for the link, which will come to you in a few days' time so you can watch that back. If you were unable to join us live, it was another very stimulating conversation. That's it for VLGA Connect for this week. Thanks for your company, whether you're listening on YouTube or podcast. It's great to have you with us, and we look forward to having you back again very soon. Bye for now.